Welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Eugene Chan. With us is Brian Wong, Hong Kong U 100 Assistant Professor and Fellow at Center on Contemporary China and the World. Mr. Wong is a Rhodes Scholar, trained at Oxford, and his work focuses on geopolitics, political ethics, and strategic risk across Asia and the global South. He regularly briefs multinational firms and investors, writes for leading international media outlets, and serves as Chief Strategy Officer to the Hong Kong ASEAN Foundation. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks for having me, Eugene. Thank you.
Right, before we start the show, I want you to explain to the viewers what exactly is Hong Kong U 100.
I must first of all commend and congratulate our leadership for introducing a scheme that aims to essentially recruit top professorial grade staff, including full professors, associate professors and assistant professors from all corners of the world, with the aim of positioning, of course, Hong Kong U as a premier and leading institution of higher education, provision, research and advocacy throughout the world, and not just here in Greater China, but also, of course, in the world at large. And I really am honoured and fortunate and privileged to be a part of this scheme, to hopefully contribute and do my due share for this home city that birthed and also raised me as well. So,
right, yeah, Brian, I mean, we at Straight Talk, we invite different people from all walks of life, and you are one of the younger generation of Hong Kong, under age 30. Sorry, I'm not going to disclose your age to the viewers, but
thank you for
this is where we start.
Respect.
Anyway, let's start. Look at our title of the show. I mean, as you know, the global power has been shifting, and the supply chains rewire. Hong Kong, once again, is at crossroads. I think is a fair thing to say. Increasingly, our attention has been turning south. The ASEAN, a region nearly 700 million people with rapid growth. Tonight, I'm going to ask a very simple but critical question. Is ASEAN a core part of Hong Kong's future? And before we go on, where exactly is ASEAN? Maybe you can tell the viewers.
Absolutely. Well, ASEAN is an 11-member bloc comprising, as you said, approximately 690 to 700 million individuals, with a median age of 30 to 30.3, depending on various census and statistics and calculus. And this region, to which we commonly refer as Southeast Asia, of course, is situated in an incredibly geostrategically significant crossroads unto its own. So if you look at, and if you plot a sort of, three dots on the world map, the USA, India and China, and you draw a sort of rough triangle, so to speak, right, and an even triangle, you'd notice that, basically as a core part of it, really, in the middle of it, you can see ASEAN, especially Indonesia, which is, of course, itself a country comprising, over 10,000 islands in its own right. And that region not only contains the Strait of Malacca, itself, again, a very important chokehold, or a choke point, really, but is also rich in natural resources, rare earths, critical raw materials, the kind of supplies you need in order for the renewable transition to take place, but also for contemporary advanced manufacturing to be viable in the first place. Recognizing that, of course, ASEAN produces over 20% of the world's semiconductor supply, as well as around 25% of its rare earth and other critical raw materials supplies. These are all very important statistics. They're not just numbers. They speak to the region's growing geopolitical importance in an era where these strategic resources are highly sought after by all great and regional powers, and also middle powers, to borrow Mark Carney's phrase earlier on, from early on this year in his speech. These are essentially resources that many countries are fighting over and contesting in order to build their own resilience and wherewithal in.
Right, thank you for bringing that very important out. We know that ASEAN has been Hong Kong, been mainland China's largest trading partner, sort of a key growth engine for the global South. So from a perspective now, I mean, let's come to Hong Kong. Why does ASEAN matter to Hong Kong more compared to a decade ago? Why suddenly become so important?
Well, the standard mainstream narrative these days, Eugene, is to emphasize the centrality of Zhuhai. In other words, corporations venturing into the open seas from the mainland, and also presumably from Hong Kong as well, but largely from the mainland, and how ASEAN in that sense has become a very fertile and important ground for offshoring of manufacturing for China Plus One diversification undertaken on a part of Chinese enterprises, not just MNCs, but also Chinese enterprises.
Right.
And of course, Hong Kong has a crucial role to play as a service conduit in terms of legal and professional services and whatnot. But I want to venture beyond the mainstream answer, because after all, I'm not here to repeat sort of standard cliches or archetypes. And I would say a couple of further observations might be in order. The first is that ASEAN's incredibly young, vibrant and dynamic population means they could very well be an important supply of personnel and labor for Hong Kong, especially in sectors where we currently have a relative shortage, right, of eligible and also willing, participants, so to speak, in these respective sectors, such as the service economy and service industries, as well as, of course, to a lesser extent, the education sector, where having more net teachers or English teachers from Southeast Asia participate in Hong Kong's education system could very well be an important coagulant in bringing, Hong Kong closer to ASEAN's ways of life, cultures and customs through a very organic manner, namely through dissemination in secondary schools via these ambassadors or teacher ambassadors from Southeast Asia. But secondly also, and I must commend again our government for their initiatives on this front, right? The scholarships that we're offering right now to Belt and Road countries, that's wonderful. And I certainly think that there's nevertheless room for further growth in numbers, as well as, of course, the kind of stipulations we attach to these scholarships, where we hopefully can require those who take up the scholarships to work and stay here in Hong Kong, alternatively move to other parts of the Greater Bay Area to make their contributions. Again, that is where ASEAN can come into play, given precisely what I said about the demographic dividend, as well as the quality of the youth and the kind of aspirational tenacity that you see amongst many of them. Thirdly, family offices. Of course, FSTV's done an excellent job, in spearheading efforts of attracting more family offices to come to Hong Kong to settle here. But I'd posit that the next step now is to see how we can integrate Southeast Asian capital and investments into Hong Kong's large-scale public infrastructural undertakings, including the northern metropolis, but also beyond, to see if there are means of forming public-private partnerships that cut across national boundaries and borders, and that again is another means of integrating ASEAN into Hong Kong. So I'd say these are just a couple of pretty straightforward, I guess, low-hanging fruits. And finally, maybe exporting the Hong Kong model as well. We have an excellent civil service, Eugene, with fantastic technical grade officers. I reckon it's high time for us to really live up to and own our reputation as a premier hub of governance, to have our civil servants go out there and exchange and undertake exchanges, to conduct symposia, workshops, and also conferences with their counterparts in Southeast Asia to learn from one another. It's not to say that Hong Kong can teach Southeast Asia unilaterally. It's a bi-directional process. ASEAN teaches us how to behave, as deft and shrewd middle powers do at times of geopolitical flux. That's what a lot of ASEAN states are great at. But what Hong Kong can do is to showcase, again, professionalism and commitment to due processes and institutions. And that is a very pivotal part of our civic and also governance culture that must not be, in my view, undone or replaced or substituted if we are indeed to safeguard Hong Kong's future under one country, two systems.
Right, Brian, thank you for a very thorough and sort of continuous thought-provoking message you just made. What sort of brings your work sort of centrally focused on ASEAN?
Yes, well, thank you very much. I have had the pleasure, when I was much younger, of serving as an educator, a debate practitioner, coach, and also, by and large, instructor throughout vast swaths of ASEAN, working with students in Malaysia, in Singapore and Indonesia, but also traveling through to Vietnam, for instance, to promote debating and public speaking there. So I'd always been fascinated by the region, not just surely through the lenses of, being a tourist, but also through the perspective of an educator. But as I, of course, progressed in my career, I was very much interested in the abstract concept of the global south, right? My interest was piqued, of course, by the events in 2020 with regards to COVID pandemic and the solidarity across global south, South-South cooperation, and then subsequently the events of 2022, which resulted in, of course, an active kinetic war on the doorsteps of Europe and the kind of geopolitical fracturing and fragmentation we saw in the aftermath of that tragedy. And it was in view of that that I worked towards publishing a book, actually co-edited with Professor Wai Tang, called Towards a Future for BRICS, which came out last year with the HKU Press. And the objective of this anthology and compendium isn't so much to sort of promote BRICS right? Or to say that BRICS is wonderful, it's fantastic, but nor is it sort of to disparagingly dismiss BRICS, right? This important, geopolitical construct and bloc. Instead, what we offered or sought to offer was a more balanced evaluation of the kind of pros and cons of BRICS that were reflective of course, the potential, but also the shortfalls and shortcomings of these countries per se.
Right. I'm going to ask you a very direct question before the break. We haven't got too long. As we talk about more from macro sense between, say, Hong Kong and ASEAN, I'm sure there will be different in terms of culture, in terms of age-wise, they're much younger. Do you see any misconception between Hong Kong and ASEAN that's being conceived by both sides? So make it very short. Are there anything, or we understand each other, it's going to work like that?
I think Hong Kong needs to understand that ASEAN is by no means a kind of boondocks and backwaters that many of our relatively lazy popular narratives tend to typecast the region as comprising, and it is more than just Singapore. And ASEAN countries would benefit from recognizing that Hong Kong, as a part of China, really can add value as a conduit to our motherland, but also concurrently we're a different part, right? We're distinct from the mainland. And that, in turn, is where the synergy and the organic value of two systems comes into play. And I hope, and I really do hope, right, that ASEAN countries can better understand, but also harness, right, this sort of distinctiveness to serve their own ends, so to speak.
Right, Brian, let's take a short break now. We'll be back with more Straight Talk. We are back on Straight Talk with Brian Wong, Hong Kong U 100, Assistant Professor and Fellow at Center on Contemporary China and the World. And we are picking up our conversation on how Hong Kong is positioning herself for deeper engagement with ASEAN. So, Brian, thank you very much for giving us a very thorough and in-depth analysis of how important ASEAN is a core part of Hong Kong's future. Let me ask you directly. We sort of joined ASEAN as an observer years ago and signed a free trade agreement in 2017. But given the so-called the mainland scale and momentum in ASEAN, where can Hong Kong so genuinely add value rather than duplicating existing efforts? I mean, what can we do that making us a niche of it?
Eugene, I think you are spot on in noting that Hong Kong need not and should not seek to replicate what the rest of our country, China, is already doing. Instead, what we need to do is to harness elements that are unique to Hong Kong. And I can name three. The first is our common law jurisdiction and our robust judicial scene and legal scene. The second is our commitment to high standards and also credentials when it comes to our professional services and accreditation programs. And the third, of course, is our unique soft power. And maybe, in the interest of time, I can home in on the first and third in a bit more detail. To the first, I would say it's high time for Hong Kong to really try and work with its counterparts, governmental, but also civil society counterparts in ASEAN, to try and build up institutions such as the courts, such as the arbitration, such as the mediation institutions you have within these countries, and to showcase, the value of Hong Kong's benchmarks and standards, and to export our personnel to these countries, to work collaboratively with them as opposed to sort of patronizing and paternalistically engaging with it, which I think is something that Hong Kong can and should do more of, to showcase the Hong Kong model. And secondly, on soft power, instead of just fixating upon telling Hong Kong's story or China's story, which I agree is in principle rather important, but requires balance and nuance, I reckon Hong Kong should also seek to help ASEAN countries tell their stories, to platform the voices of their leaders, of the intellectuals and diplomats as well.
Right, Brian, you just said about the strength of Hong Kong. What is the not so strong part of Hong Kong that we should not be doing anymore, for example?
I don't want to take a negative approach to this question. So it's not so much that there are things we should stop doing, but I really think, there's one low-hanging fruit that we ought to focus on. It's our education system.
Right.
I of course, am privileged to have received my education both in Hong Kong and also abroad and overseas. And yet for many Hong Kong youth, many of those who are in their teens right now, the question is, can our curriculum be adapted and modified in a manner that reflects the needs of the 21st century when it comes to the rise of AI, geopolitical flux and the extreme uncertainties and precarities surrounding employment upon their graduation. I really hope that our education system can instill into our youth not just a sense of civic responsibility, which is of course very important, but also a degree of global curiosity and awareness.
I see.
A willingness to learn about the world and see the world through others' lenses, not just through Hong Kong's lenses or Chinese lenses, but what can we learn from others' experiences in navigating this really discombobulating time.
Right.
And one concrete example is the fact that, many of my Malaysian friends are in fact the most polyglot Asians I've ever met. Right, they speak a number of dialects, Chinese dialects. They speak English, Malay, Bahasa, Terima kasih, and they speak Mandarin, of course. And some of them may even, speak French or German on top of that. And who are these individuals? Well, they're, of course, internationally and foreign educated returnees who go back to the country, Malaysia, so to speak, and join the public sector, or alternatively become academics, become researchers, and yet they all share a common trait, which is this kind of cultural fluidity and mobility, to move with ease in and out of different circles, to be meeting with an American investor today, and then a Chinese diplomat the day after, and then, of course, a South African delegation of academics the day after that. That kind of versatility and dexterity has always been how Hong Kongers have prided themselves, right? And my question here is our education setup and our institutions of training and education still able to sustain that going forward into the future? Or is there a risk that we are inadvertently turning inwards because of sort of relative deprioritization or reprioritization, so to speak, that's gone on over the past decade or so? So I really hope we can remain international and keep our youth empowered and willing to take risks when it comes to intellectual exploration, as well as more curious and inquisitive about the world at large, not just in relation to ASEAN, but also great power competition, also the rise of middle powers, also the tussle between the global north and south, or the delicate dance between them. There's so much about the world that we can unpack there.
Right, Brian, I must stop you there, because you've been very sort of stimulating everyone's minds to a very high level right now. But to come back to be sort of more realistic, we have to position ourselves so that we are competitive. Look at Singapore. Singapore has been geographically, they're much closer to us than they are compared to ASEAN. So what is that we should be doing that, apart from the three things you mentioned earlier? Anything in particular? I'm sure the viewers are going to say, all right, I totally agree with you. Suddenly I see a new picture of ASEAN. What businesses should we go there? What can each individual can do apart from the government?
Firstly, let's ensure that our youth, top talented youngsters, can receive the opportunities to intern and work at multilateral institutions and organizations, including, say, the ADB or the AIB in Beijing instead, or alternatively, the number of UN agencies in Bangkok and Thailand, that they have the opportunity to receive such exposure. That would be a very useful starting point. And secondly, don't just offer scholarships to top talents coming from ASEAN, coming to Hong Kong. That's great. But also think about offering scholarships for Hong Kong youth to study in leading ASEAN universities, or alternatively, institutions of postgraduate diplomas and studies, right? And finally, arts and cultural exchanges, so obvious. Arts and culture can speak. It's a universal language that anyone can speak. They can transcend boundaries and borders, right? So I really hope that our government, which has already done a lot of excellent work with regards to ASEAN, can do more when it comes to supporting our local arts and cultural creativity practitioners and groups, and to help them also Tuhai and go overseas and engage with their counterparts in ASEAN to showcase the best of Hong Kong's culture, whether it be our nostalgia for Anita Mui, Leslie Cheung, Roman Tam, or alternatively, our younger generations of independent creatives who combine and fuse street art with hip-hop, with classical Chinese elements. I mean, that kind of bricolage is what makes Hong Kong so special and great, right, Eugene?
Indeed. Thank you for bringing all those flashes of images in front of me when you're talking. So, Brian, another thing that I'm sure the viewers are going to say, ASEAN gives us an impression, I'll go straight with you, is that it prides itself on neutrality, on consensus. That's a nice word to put it. On the other side, they're not taking sides. But with the intensifying US and China rivalry right now, which everybody sees it, how are they forced to take sides, or they're still wanting to do business with Hong Kong in particular?
Well, first of all, I think by and large, most ASEAN states see and recognize Hong Kong as a very special part of China. They understand that one country, two systems is very much alive and well, and that the institutional differences between the mainland and Hong Kong render this city an attractive location for intermediary and also for facilitating services as a conduit between them and the mainland. But of course, awareness and understanding on that front could still be bolstered and improved, and that it behoves us, therefore, Eugene, to emphasize the two systems and to highlight how the two systems, exist, not just, because they are important commitments that we are bound by, but also because they serve the interests of one country, right?
Right.
That's very important.
Right.
We need to keep these differences alive. But secondly, on the geopolitical question, I would say ASEAN states are multi-aligned. They're not non-aligned, right? So of course, on one hand, they want to court China for Chinese investments, Chinese businesses, potentially a Chinese market, provided that we can rebalance our domestic consumption or bolster our domestic consumption and shift away from being purely export and largely investment-led. But on the other hand, many of these states would still want to keep America on side, even despite the kind of vacillations and precariousness in their behaviors that we've seen over the past couple of years, really, from the States. And that's because the States is an important military and security partner for a number of ASEAN states. And for others, they see it as a useful source of investment and technology as well. But they're also engaging the EU, Japan, Central Asia, the Gulf. So it's not just China or America that these countries are thinking of and contemplating about dealing with, right? It's really about building up resilience through engaging in all directions. And a friend of mine calls this omnilateral diplomacy, so to speak.
Right. Brian, I'm going to ask you the last question. You've got 1 minute to answer me. That looking ahead, Hong Kong needs to develop, and I think technology is something that we have to work on, and actually having more talents. I mean, we are 7.5 million population. We need to go to the 10 million mark to making sure Hong Kong becomes a thriving and sustaining economy. Do you see any collaboration between ASEAN and Hong Kong in achieving that?
Structural unemployment, non-alignment resulting in significant military and also warfare-related risks, healthcare sector applications of AI resulting in privacy infringements. These are all pertinent questions and problems to do with AI safety and governance, Eugene. And I reckon Hong Kong and ASEAN can definitely work hand in hand in advancing an Asia-oriented and Asia-originating, but ultimately globally applicable conception of AI governance. And that's exactly what we can do here in Hong Kong. Thank you very much.
Well, Brian, I think with that, I have to wrap up our discussion today, and thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. As we have heard tonight, ASEAN's rise presents Hong Kong with an opportunity. Readiness for ASEAN is ultimately about investing in shared growth, shared talent, and a shared future. Have a good evening and see you next week.